Prologue. I opened my eyes and saw my grandson, Matthew, standing at the side of the bed. "Hi, Grandpa." "Mom, Grandma." Grandpa opened his eyes. "Ma!" My wife and Matthew's mother jumped up from their chairs and joined Matthew, I'm certain. I was smiling, but it was hard to tell while I was intoxicated. After all, why wouldn't I be smiling? I was awake and looking at a few of my loved ones. It meant I beat the odds, which were just under 50-50 coming out of the surgery. Whether the operation was successful in getting the growth out of my brain would be answered as soon as the surgeon came around later. But for now, the higher powers granted me the privilege of seeing my wife and family again. My beautiful wife was smiling back at me. "Welcome back, JR, she said, as she bent down to kiss my forehead. My given name is William, same as my dad's, so I became Billy, or worse, Junior, until I convinced my mother to call me JR, short for Junior. The name stuck, and 60 years later, I'm still JR. The news spread fast, and within 10 minutes the room was crowded. My oldest daughter stood next to her mom, my ex, my son and twin daughters next to theirs. Everyone looking down on me, most with tears on their cheeks. The hospital usually wouldn't allow so many people in a room, but probably made an exception because my daughter-in-law, Matthew's mom, was a resident here. Even her pull didn't get the 2 youngest grandchildren past the nurse's station, though. Hopefully, my recovery would last long enough to hold those 2 girls in my arms at least one more time. That afternoon, with everyone except my wife out of the room, the surgeon came in and gave me the news. He thinks he got the entire growth. They'd start chemo and radiation soon. I'd noticed some changes in my cognitive, speech, and motor skills for a while, but the therapy would help recover most of it. All in all, he was positive that the first hurdle was behind us. Of course, he didn't have to remind me that the chemo and radiation would be tough, and no guarantee of long-term success. Very few with similar tumors ever made it past 5 years. We had talked about this. All this surgery, therapy, and treatments would be expensive, with a less than 10% chance we'd still be together and watching Matthew's grade school graduation 4 years from now. So the thing I have to ask myself is this: do you feel lucky? Damn right I do. How it started. It wasn't always like this feeling of being lucky, that is. Sure, I spent 15 years racing motorcycles without a major injury. That's pretty lucky, I guess. I had a decent childhood, growing up just outside of Chicago. I had a few rough patches in my teens and early 20s, probably had something to do with my discovery of, and poor choices involving booze and bad women. Which kind of explains Jane, my first wife. Ever hear the song Jackson, sung by one of Frank Sinatra's daughters, Nancy, I think, and by the Cashes? "We got caught in a fever, hotter than a pepper sprout." Well, that line pretty much describes my first marriage. I was working nights stocking shelves at the local grocery and going to school during the day. Weekends were spent trying to make up for all the drinks I missed during the week. I was on my 3rd drink when a girl I dated in high school walked in with Jane. Jane just had that look about her, the kind that said she'd give you the best night and you'd go blind with a smile. The ex-girlfriend came over to say hi and introduced me to Jane. Before I finished my 4th drink, Jane was ditching her friend and pulling me out into the parking lot. We banged once in my car, not an easy thing to do in a Corvair. Then we headed to my apartment and did it again. At 3 in the morning, we woke up to start all over. She even asked me to take her from behind, even though I've never done that before. That was the beginning of the fever. I finally woke up Saturday around noon to find Jane in the kitchen making coffee and eating a bowl of cereal. She was freshly showered, bare as the day she was born. I knew she had a pretty face and nice body, but seeing her in the daylight without a stitch of clothes made me realize she was world-class. I grabbed a cup of coffee and went to shower. When I came out of the bathroom, Jane was stripping the bed. "These sheets need to be washed. Do you have a shirt and a pair of gym shorts I can wear?" How did I get so damn lucky to bed a woman as gorgeous as Jane? I'd find out much later, too late, that she was rebounding after her married lover dumped her when he received an ultimatum from his wife. I let my little head do all my thinking, and Jane became my wife. Years later, one of my good friends from back then asked me, "What were you thinking? You two had absolutely nothing in common." This wasn't true. Jane and I loved sharing the bed. Nothing else mattered at the time. Wake up, screw, go to school, go to work, screw, go to sleep, repeat. I was 22. Who needed anything more? I should have been paying closer attention. In my defense, I was finishing my final year of school and working at the store. Jane was working in sales at an insurance agency. Her paychecks were paying most of our living expenses, which allowed me to cut back from 5 to 3 days a week, Monday through Wednesday. We were like bunnies the other 4 days, so I had little cause for concern. Or so I thought. One of the other stock boys, yes, in the 70s they were still called stock boys, needed to trade days for a long weekend. He asked me the week before if we could trade Wednesday for Thursday. I agreed and promptly forgot all about it. Wednesday I show up and he's giving me the look, what the hell, before I remember the trade-off. I call the house, leave a message, I'll be home, and grab something to drink and flowers. I get home by 7 to an empty house. By 7:30 I opened the bottle. By 9 it was empty. By 10 I'm lying on the sofa in a dark room sipping the second one. At 10:15 the apartment door opens and Jane walks straight into the bedroom without seeing me and starts the shower. I took the opportunity while she showered to grab her clothes off the bedroom floor. No mistaking the odor of cheating. I'm on the bed barely controlling myself when Jane walks out of the bathroom drying her hair. Seeing me, she nearly jumps back into the bathroom. "Damn it, JR, you scared the crap out of me." As she finishes the sentence, Jane's eyes focus on the pair of panties I'm holding in my hand. Jane is speechless. "Go sleep on the sofa tonight. I've had too much to drink tonight and I'm afraid what I might do or say if we start talking about this, because I'm certain we'll be shouting in a minute and then who knows what. Just grab a t-shirt to sleep in or whatever and get out of our bedroom." Jane was still standing there. "Now," I shouted. I took a blanket off the bed and threw it into the living room. When Jane left the bedroom with a t-shirt in her hand, I closed the door. I actually fell asleep, probably from exhaustion. But I woke up around 6, my head swimming from the drinks and thoughts of what I'd do now. My pride told me to kick the wench out and divorce her, but my pride would also take a hit if we divorced after only a year of marriage because she's unfaithful. I imagined the chuckles behind my back. Hell of a dilemma. By 7 I got up, went out to the sofa and shook Jane awake. "Get up." Jane opened her eyes and they looked swollen. She'd obviously been crying. "So, who is it?" Jane waited too long before answering. I could see her hesitation, wondering whether to lie. "Don't lie to me. If I find out you're lying to me, it won't be pretty." Jane gave in. "Henry Jacobs, you're sleeping with your boss?" "Yes." "What does his wife say about this?" Jane's eyes widened, the terror evident in my question. Did I intend to tell Henry's wife? "She doesn't know. Please don't tell her. He's got kids." "Are you delusional? You two are screwing behind our backs and you don't want his wife to know?" "If he doesn't want his wife to know that he's an adulterer, he shouldn't be dipping his wick in my wife." It was apparent my words hit somewhere in the logical space of Jane's brain, because she dropped her face in her hands and began weeping. "I'm sorry, JR. I'm sorry. Grab what you need for a few weeks. Find some place to stay for a while. Your sister's or Sally's. I don't care where, just get out of my sight until I can figure out what we do next." Obviously, Jane hadn't understood the full extent of my anger. Maybe I was too successful in remaining relatively calm and in control, because what she said next could only come from the mouth of a complete idiot. "Why should I be the one to leave? This is just as much my apartment as yours, I've never hit a woman, and thank goodness I didn't choose this moment to act on my caveman impulses. Jane will never know how close she came to getting smacked at that moment. Tell you what, Jane, you stay here, I'll move out, but my first stop will be to your parents' house, so I can drop your stained underwear and hand them to your father. Imagine the pride he'll have in his little girl when I tell him you're sleeping with your married boss." I don't think I could have shocked Jane any more than I did with that statement. She knew her father. She knew how he would react if I carried out my threat. "You wouldn't do that. You love my father. Why would you hurt him like that?" "Because you've hurt me beyond reason and I hate everything and everybody right now. Leave today and we keep the reason for our separation between you and me." "What about Mrs. Jacobs?" "Don't press your luck, Jane. I haven't figured out what I'm going to do about Henry just yet." I didn't tell Jane that it was my intention to let old Henry sweat for a while. Then I was going to beat him up. Jane moved out and lived with her friend Sally. Sally was single, and I'm certain that during the 5 weeks of our separation, Sally reintroduced Jane to the world of being single. The trouble was, Jane never really cared for the single lifestyle. She latched onto me and married me because, 1, I think she loved me in her own selfish way, and 2, She liked the security of, for once, having a full-time man. Too bad she couldn't keep her legs together and not screw her boss. Me? I admit, I loved Jane and admit I missed having her home. And I really missed our nights together. During the 5 weeks of our separation, I picked up a couple of women. All I can say is, there's good, then there's great, and then there's Jane in a league of her own. Which brings up something that bothered me back then and bothered me for years after. Jane gave it up to Henry Jacobs, who I thought was by no means any kind of stud. I never shared this with anyone, but the truth is I probably wouldn't have been so damn pissed off if Jane was with somebody like Steve McQueen or Sean Connery, to use two examples of guys who were considered studs back in the 70s. Instead, she gives her prime to a guy who I consider to be downright plain and ugly. What does that say about me? I never asked Jane if Henry was big, never wanted to go there. My pride took a double shot, and that's the reason I spent our separation trying to reclaim my sense of manliness by screwing around. Maybe Jane got sucked in by the whole power thing. He was her boss after all. She never could explain it to me. And since she could never explain it properly, I kept my eyes open after we reconciled, never really trusting her after that. Yes, we reconciled. I knew it then and know it now. At least half the female and most of the male population thinks that's just plain stupid. And except for one great outcome, our daughter, I was stupid. Here's how it happened. Jane shows up 5 weeks into our separation and asks if we can go to counseling together. She's been missing me and thinks if we try a second time, maybe we can make it work. My little brain lets her in the door, and within an hour we're banging away on the couch, in the shower and in the bed. I woke up the next morning with the sunlight shining through her blonde hair. She opened those big blue eyes and stared into mine. It's then I knew some love still lived in my heart for this woman. Despite the hurt she put on me, could I take her back and make another go of it? I laid down some ground rules. She quits the insurance agency. No way am I going to let her stay hanging with Henry. No way am I going to let him look me in the eye knowing he banged my wife. By the way, I did make a house call to the Jacob household after Jane quit. This fat, dumpy, plain as matzo cracker woman answers the door. She doesn't let me in, so I stand out on the front porch and give her the news that her husband had an affair. I didn't want to use any foul language with a strange woman, with my wife. You could have knocked me over with a feather with how she reacted to the news. Tell that trashy wife of yours to stay away from my Henry. I've seen the way she dresses. You call yourself a man, letting your wife out of the house like that? With that, Mrs. Jacobs slams the door in my face. I turned around and walked back to my car, shaking my head and thinking to myself, well, that didn't go as expected. We tried, and for the next 7 years we did okay. It helped when Jane got pregnant and gave birth to Christy. And yes, I checked the paternity using the technology available at the time. I even rechecked years later when DNA testing became available. Christy is my biological daughter. During those 7 years, I found my niche in the world of finance. Having graduated with a business degree, I started working for one of the big banks downtown. Money was tight for a while, but with each advancement at the bank, more money was coming in. I felt like I was hitting my stride. A good job, a great daughter, enough money for the essentials, and then some. The only thing lacking concerned my marriage. Jane and I still had all the passion in us. We ate many of our meals as a family and seemed to get along all right. I had down that something was missing. It didn't help that we had very different interests. I spent a few nights a week playing tennis at the club, weekends either playing golf with coworkers or racing at a track in Indiana. Jane spent a couple nights a week at her 2 book clubs and spent the weekends at a variety of art. We also began to diverge on our political views. I think I was always a bit conservative. Not over the top John Birch or anything, but a bit teach a man to fish and he can feed himself kind of thinking. I even spent a few months volunteering on the Scoop Jackson for President campaign. Jane, on the other hand, started leaning farther and farther left of the mainstream Daily Democrats. We dealt with our differences by not discussing politics in the House. We never raised our voices or had any heated discussions. But it was out there and causing a rift. Everything came to a head one afternoon. I was in my office when Helen, my administrative assistant, came in. "Did you hear about Mr. Harrison?" "No, what about him?" "He's dead." He was walking down the sidewalk heading to lunch with a client and a bucket fell on his head. A window washer dropped a bucket from way up high on the Marshall. building and it killed Mr. Harrison. Helen started to cry. Most everyone loved our CEO. I got up from my desk and held Helen until she could get a hold of herself. She looked at me and seemed embarrassed, then walked out the office and down the hall to the ladies' room. I fell back in my chair, stunned by the news. It was so random. How could such a terrible thing kill such a great man? Here's the part that made me search my soul. 1 hour ago I had just passed the Marshall Building on my way back from lunch when I spotted Mr. Harrison and another man heading toward me. As we approached, Mr. Harrison recognized me and smiled, while he and the other man continued to walk and talk. I had taken pleasure in the fact the CEO smiled at me. It was probably less than 2 minutes later that he died walking under the spot I walked by only minutes before. The event helped me make up my mind. That evening after dinner, I skipped my tennis lesson and sat down with Jane. Jane, last week I got a call from a headhunter. There's a position available for me at a bank in Spokane, Washington. It's a great position and more money. I've decided to accept the position. JR, I don't want to move to Washington. Actually, I wasn't asking you to move. This is probably as good a time as any to end this farce. Jane looked relieved. What about Christy? I held my breath. I'd like custody of Christy. Jane's reaction to my news made it obvious she was already considering a separation. My parents are going to be upset if you move out to Washington with their granddaughter. I think they're going to be pissed at me for allowing it. I'll make certain you and your parents see Christy as much as possible. We'll work out liberal visitation, holidays, summers, whatever. Tears began running down Jane's cheeks, and those tears triggered my own. We sat at the kitchen table and held hands. Jane spoke first. I'm sorry we couldn't make it happen, JR. I'm sorry. Me too, Jane. You do know I love you. You know I wanted this to work out, but there's no getting past the point we want more than the other is giving. And that's not either of our fault. It just isn't there. I know you feel it too. It's going to hurt Christy. She'll be glad she's going with you. She's Daddy's little girl, but she is going to miss her mommy. The sadness was overwhelming, and I started to doubt the resolve behind my decision. Do you want to give it another try? I haven't given notice. We could try to make it work. Jane looked up at me and smiled. Damn it, JR, that's just like you. I know you would try, but do you really want to live like this for the next 12 years until Christy graduates from high school? Then we break her heart anyway? In the meantime, we both are missing what we know is out there. Jane and I talked for another hour. She admitted to recently considering a separation to join the Peace Corps, but hesitated because of how it would affect Christy. Jane may not be the nurturing mother type, but she does love her daughter in her own way, and didn't know how to resolve the conflict she was feeling. My news settled it. I don't want to place too much blame on Jane for the failure of our marriage, but here's another thought I've never shared with anyone, especially Jane, that her adultery all those years ago probably made it difficult, if not impossible, for our marriage to succeed. There was always that little empty spot in the relationship, a little bit of distrust, a little bit of anger, that never fully vanished. Those women I were with during our separation didn't help because it's true, 2 wrongs don't make a right. I know there are some couples who have gotten past the deceit of adultery, but they probably have more going for them than we did. And I bet those couples always feel at least a small piece of their love was permanently damaged. I also realized that if I ever married again, I'd like my wife to be my best friend. Christy did take it hard. I think it was a good thing Jane changed her mind about the Peace Corps. For the first 6 months after our move to Spokane, I would fly with Christy back to Chicago once a month to visit her mom and the grandparents. The first summer she stayed at each of their homes for at least a week. I spent those weeks missing her and working my butt off in my new position. Jane flew back to Spokane with Christy. Christy wanted to show her mom her new house and bedroom. I was reluctant to allow Jane to bring Christy to Spokane, but the divorce would be final soon, and so far, Jane hadn't put up any roadblocks to what was becoming a model for friendly divorces. I had the guest room fixed up for Jane. She'd be staying with us for 2 days and 3 nights. After we sang to Christy and had her settled down, Jane and I went into the living room to chat. It didn't take Jane long to get to the point. Do you have a girlfriend? Jane was smiling as she asked. No, been working too hard and been concentrating on Christy. It sucks being both parents. Jane laughed. When's the last time you got laid? The night before our discussion at the kitchen table. 6 months ago? Me too. Let's do it, JR. In less than a minute, we were both on my bed. We were making up for all the lost years, and it was better than anything I had in years. In the end, completely exhausted, we spoke for the first time since Jane's offer 2 hours ago. I assumed you'd have all kinds of guys hanging around you. You still look 10 years younger than you are, and you're still a babe. Jane laughed. I got a big scare, and it kept my legs crossed. Sally Reynolds is still single and still playing the field. She ended up with some kind of STD that's incurable. Some kind of herpes virus. It sounds awful. Sally has to take meds just to control the outbreaks. Just hearing about it scared the hell out of me enough to keep me away from this stuff. I needed this. We both did. We made love once more. We set the alarm for 6 a.m., allowing Jane time to get into her own bed before Christy woke up. For the next 2 days, we played it cool around Christy so we wouldn't confuse her. No hand-holding, kisses, or hugs in front of her. But as soon as she went down for the night, Jane and I were back at it. When the alarm went off at 6 the last morning of Jane's visit, we made love one more time. It would be the last time. With Jane's return to Chicago, it became apparent how much I missed the emotional and physical aspects of a relationship. For the first time since moving to Spokane, I took a good, hard look around. There were plenty of nice-looking women working at the bank and few restrictions on coworkers dating or being married. The rules forbade the dating married couple to be employed in the same branch or department. One partner could not have any authority over the other, no matter how many levels between the two. The bank realized that in the current environment, many relationships started in the workplace, merely because that's where people spend a majority of their waking hours. So the bank did its best to accommodate. When two co-workers started to date, one of the couple was given a transfer. The policy seemed to work. That's why it wasn't a problem when I found myself attracted to one of the branch tellers. Caitlin was a beautiful 24-year-old that had the personality to light up a room just by walking into it. She had a sensitivity towards others that I found especially appealing. She loved children, dogs, her family, and Jesus, not especially in that order. We'd been dating for a few weeks when I was scheduled to race one weekend in Portland. Caitlin asked if she could join me. She surprised me when she said we could share a room, but requested it have 2 beds. I dropped Christy off with her nanny, Mrs. Hanson, and picked up Caitlin at her apartment. Caitlin spent a few moments looking over my motorcycle strapped down on the pickup's bed. I held the door open as she climbed into the cab. She caught me staring at her long tan legs and blushed. Caitlin was wearing a very pretty sundress that obviously didn't allow for a bra. The drive to Portland was relaxed and fun. Caitlin spent the first half hour asking questions about my bike. She'd never ridden on one because her parents were very anti-motorcycle. When I convinced her that very few bikers were members of a criminal motorcycle gangs, she seemed to relax a little. She admitted to withholding our real destination from her parents, telling them we were visiting Portland, but saying nothing about attending a motorcycle race. Friday night in the hotel room was chaste. Some kissing, but nothing more. We both slept in PJs in our respective beds. Saturday was spent at the track. I did all right, with a 3rd-place finish which got me on the podium. Unfortunately, the race was marred by a bad crash. Kevin Sawyer and Ted Colton got busted up when Ted high-sided coming out of a turn. Both had to be taken to the hospital, and from what I heard, Ted probably will never race again. The incident really affected Caitlin. She asked me on the way home Sunday how I could possibly take such chances. It's hard to explain why dangerous activities appeal to some people. Hobbies such as motorcycle racing, skydiving, or rock climbing are important to the individual participant. I think it's in their DNA. Some people need the thrill, others are horrified by any danger. Caitlin belonged in the second category. I found out how much when I called her on Tuesday to ask her for another date. Caitlin turned me down, told me she was falling for me, but couldn't allow herself to get involved with a man who took such chances. I wasn't ready to quit racing, nor was I ready to spend my life with someone who feared my lifestyle. It was early in our relationship, and a good time to cut the cord before we went any further down the road. Pity, though, she really was a very sweet lady. I was playing in a mixed doubles tennis tournament when I saw the beautiful blonde sitting in the stands. She was watching the match and smiling. I tried not to stare, but failed because the next serve went right past me. Damn it, JR, stop being an idiot. Tess Young, my doubles partner, is the most competitive person I've ever met. She's 5'10" and built like Elle Macpherson, only with arms like Linda Hamilton. She catches the eye of every man she meets and laughs all the way to her bed, which she shares with her girlfriend. Did I mention she's gay? Sorry, Tess. Tess looked into the stands and smiled back at me with one of those, I know what you're looking at, smiles. Tess returned the next serve between our two opponents. I rallied and broke their serve to win the set. I looked back into the stands to see the tall blonde stand up clapping. We won the second set and the match. After shaking hands with our opponents at the net, Tess whispered in my ear, Would you like to be introduced? I looked at Tess and she read my mind. No, she's not gay. I work with her and she wants to join the club. I invited her here to show her around. Come on, I'll introduce you. Tess knew my situation, divorced for almost a full year. Although not celibate, I wasn't some hound trying to get in the bed with every woman I dated. After Caitlin, I met a few other nice women, but nothing ever clicked. Many were put off by the thought of becoming an instant mother to my 6-year-old daughter. One had the gall to suggest I ship Christy back to her mother so we'd have time to get to know each other. My reply? No thanks, you've just told me everything I need to know about you. So, I was more than willing to let Tess introduce me to this beautiful woman with the smile that lit the court. Denise, this is JR, my tennis partner and an all-around good guy. JR, this is my coworker and good friend, Denise. I tried to keep my composure. Tess tells me you're thinking of joining the club. Do you enjoy tennis? Yay, stupid, but it's all I could think to ask at the moment. And it was a better opening line than the thought swirling around in my noggin, so I bit my tongue before I said, You're beautiful. Marry me. Denise ignored the triviality of my question. Yes, I love tennis. I played varsity tennis at the U. Well, that explained the great pair of legs and the athletic stature. Since you're thinking of joining the club, would you like to be my guest tomorrow and play a match? Maybe I can convince you to join. Denise agreed to meet me the next afternoon, and I made my excuses to leave her with Tess before I made a fool of myself. I gave Tess a call later that evening and found out a bit about Denise. Tess told me Denise was in a marital state of limbo. Her husband had abandoned her and their 4-year-old son over 8 months ago. Denise filed papers to divorce him and contacted the church to have the marriage annulled. It would be a few more months before the divorce papers could be accepted by the court for abandonment. She's a very nice woman, a bit conservative when it comes to her ideas relating to marriage, men, and intimacy. I've never heard her say a bad word toward anyone, even the scumbag that left her. She was quite devastated when he walked out, claims she doesn't know why he left. We have lunch together at the office, and I really like her. She hasn't been out socially with any man since he left. I thought you'd be a perfect person to help get her out of her shell. Start with tennis and maybe ask her out to dinner sometime. I know you think she's cute. I saw the look you gave her. Denise and I met the next day and she trounced me in tennis. I barely held my own and managed to win the second set. Then she got serious and beat me 6-2 in the third. The short tennis skirt and the sleeveless top didn't help my concentration. Wow, it was a pleasure just watching her move around the court. She was kind enough to agree to a rematch soon. The following week we spent a few minutes chatting immediately after our match before Denise excused herself to go pick up her son from the sitters. Just as she turned to leave, I asked her to have dinner with me that weekend. Denise gave me a smile and accepted. Dinner was great. Denise and I exchanged life histories and current situations, especially the trials and tribulations of raising a child as a single parent. We had a few other dates after that dinner, and I finally decided to introduce Christy to Denise and her son Mike. The two kids got along. Christy liked Denise, so the romance continued to build. I was in love with Denise by this point, and was fairly certain she felt the same about me. We took a slow approach to the physical aspects of our relationship, except for the tennis. Over the first 2 months when Denise surprised me by suggesting an overnight stay at Coeur d'Alene. We arranged sitters for the kids, and I found myself in a hotel room overlooking the lake as the moon rose over the horizon. But the real beauty was standing in front of me, with the moonlight behind her. The light shone through the sheer negligee Denise was wearing. I held her in my arms and kissed her. Denise made me close the curtains even though we were on the 10th floor, and there wasn't a chance anyone could see in the room. The lights were all turned off and it was nearly pitch black in the room. Surprisingly, this was probably the first time I made love to a woman where I couldn't see her, and it was hot in its own way. I concentrated on my sense of smell and touch in ways I never had before. I stripped Denise of the negligee as I kissed her. We parted long enough for me to turn back the covers, and I laid her down on the bed. This was another reason why the lack of light in the room was advantageous. When Denise grabbed for the top sheet to cover herself, it was easy to convince her it wasn't needed. Since I couldn't really see her, the cover was unnecessary. There was nothing out of the ordinary that night. We did everything slowly and gently, and afterwards we laid next to one another, catching our breath. My recovery time was quicker than normal. We did it again with Denise placing her hand on the back of my head as I kissed her neck. We fell asleep that way. When I opened my eyes in the morning, there was enough sunlight coming into the room that I could see again. Denise was still asleep. The covers were over us, and I couldn't help but lift them. I laughed silently when I looked at Denise. Sometime in the night she got up and put on a nightshirt. The negligee was draped over a chair. I laughed because it was going to take some getting used to such modesty. Jane and I always slept in the nude unless it was freezing outside. Even then, we'd usually just turn the electric blanket up high. My physical relationship with Denise was very restrained, but very loving. We kept it hidden from her parents because Denise was still married in their eyes, and they considered any physical relationship as adulterous. Needless to say, they didn't like me. That's why it was no surprise how they reacted when a month later, Denise's husband returned to town. Both her parents and her in-laws were overjoyed at the return of Dylan, the prodigal husband. All four put pressure on Denise to stop the divorce proceedings and try to salvage the marriage. I stopped by her parents' home in an effort to talk some sense into her folks and was greeted at the door by her mother. You could have frozen hell with the look I got from Denise's mother when I asked why they wanted the couple to reconcile. Did they even know where the bastard had been and what he'd been doing? Didn't they care to find out before pushing Denise back together with him? That's none of your business, and I'd thank you to leave Denise alone from now on. She slammed the door shut. I was hoping to see Denise alone and couldn't go to her apartment since Dylan moved back in. My best hope would be during the next weekend, when we were scheduled to play in a tennis tournament. I shouldn't have been surprised to find out, through the club's scheduler, that Denise had resigned her club membership. Finally, Tess interceded on my behalf and convinced Denise to call me. Tess informed me that Denise had given her 2 weeks' notice at work. Denise did call me that day. She apologized for the way she ended our relationship, telling me she avoided calling me because she didn't know how to explain what was happening. She felt she owed it to her marriage and to their son. She would do her best to forgive Dylan and salvage their marriage. Denise, I think you're making a giant mistake, but I'm going to respect your wishes and leave you alone. You know we love each other, and you know we were bound to be the best of friends. I heard Denise sobbing as she whispered, "I know, JR, and I love you," before she hung up the phone. I was a walking zombie for at least the first week after Denise's phone call. Worse yet was Christy's reaction when I told her we'd most likely never see Denise and Mike again. "But Daddy, you told me you loved Denise and you thought she loved you. You seemed so happy when you two were together. Why can't you get her back?" I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hold Christy until she fell asleep in my arms. 3 weeks later, I walked out of my favorite watering hole across from the office. I stood outside taking in a breath of fresh air when I was approached by a strange man. "Hey, aren't you J.R. Douglas?" I looked at the guy, trying to figure out if I knew him, when he suddenly threw a punch to my gut, catching me off guard and knocking the wind out of me. Before I could fully react, he landed another hit to my face. I dropped to my knees trying to regain my footing when the bar door opened. 2 guys I knew saw what was happening and yelled out. My assailant quickly ran off, and I lost consciousness for a moment. I ended up in the emergency room with some bruises and a mild concussion. Because of the concussion, I spent the night at the hospital. I was surprised when I woke to find Tess standing next to the bed holding Christy's hand. Christy was holding mine. "Good morning, JR. Daddy." Christy went to hug me, but was held back by Tess. She leaned over and whispered into Christy's ear about broken ribs. "Hi, baby." Then I looked up at Tess. "Why are you here?" Tess and I were tennis partners, but I couldn't imagine she'd get a call if I was injured. "I'm here because I saw Christy in the waiting room. She was in there with Mrs. Hanson. I sent Mrs. Hanson home. She was dead tired. I told her I'd keep Christy with me until you were released. The doctor said you can go home this morning if there aren't any complications. That doesn't explain why you're at the hospital in the first place. I brought Denise and Mike into the emergency room last night. We'll talk about it later." Tess motioned toward Christy with her eyes. I got the hint, but was anxious to learn why both Denise and Mike were in emergency. I figured it couldn't be too serious if Tess brought them in instead of an ambulance. Tess understood my concern and leaned into my ear. "They're all right. Her folks picked them up. I'll fill you in later." The doctor and a nurse came in. I noticed how gorgeous the nurse was while she pulled the IV out of my arm. I looked. Her name tag read, Wendy. She smiled when she caught me looking. The doctor gave me the okay to go home, and within an hour I was being wheeled out the door and into Tess's car for the drive home. "The police stopped by while you were asleep last night, gave me their cards and asked if you would call them this morning." We pulled into the drive, and Tess carried Christy into the house. She was already fast asleep. I showed Tess Christy's room, and Tess set her down on the bed. I covered my baby with a light blanket. We sat at the kitchen table, and at last I heard about last night's mayhem. "Last night Denise's husband went berserk. He knew the two of you dated, but until yesterday he never knew you shared the bed. Little Mike said something that set him off. He slapped Denise until she admitted you two slept together. Then he went out looking for you. After he finished with you, he went back and hit Denise a couple more times. Mike stepped in. What a brave little boy. Dylan grabbed him and broke the poor kid's arm. After he left the house, Denise called me and I brought her to the emergency room. You should have heard her. She was so worried about you." Tess got up and poured the coffee she brewed. I sat thinking, wait, if Denise's husband only heard about the last night, how did he find me so fast? "Don't know. Maybe he was already stalking you. We'll know more after the police pick the bastard up. They have an officer stationed in front of Denise's house, and there's an all-points bulletin out on him." "How are Denise and Mike?" "Denise has a swollen lip and black eye. Mike has his arm in a cast. They're both on painkillers. I called her folks' house and her mom hung up on me. Said something about a dyke before she hung up the phone. I don't think either one of us is going to get through to Denise while she's staying at her folks." The police came over later that morning. 2 detectives took my statement and asked if I would be willing to press charges. Their attitude toward me started out cold, but changed over the course of our conversation. At first they treated me like some pervert who seduced and screwed a married woman, then got my just desserts. After I explained the abandonment, our lengthy courtship, and my intention to marry Denise when the divorce was finalized, they treated me differently. Things got even more complicated after that first morning. After the police caught and processed Dylan, it turned out there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest in Montana. Apparently, the reason he left Denise was that he got an 18-year-old waitress in Whitehorse pregnant while on a fishing trip with his buddies. When she threatened to have him arrested for coercion and emotional abuse unless he came back and married her, he went out to Montana, convinced her to terminate the pregnancy, and then spent the next few months being so unbearable that she finally kicked him out and sent him packing back to his wife. When the young girl's parents found out the whole story, they called the cops and the warrant for his arrest followed. Unfortunately, it was a low priority and the Whitehorse PD never followed up until Dylan was arrested in Spokane. Dylan eventually spent 6 years in a Washington state prison for the 3 assaults before being extradited to Montana to spend a few more years as a guest of their prison system. Dylan never made it home. Given his propensity for violence, I was tracking just in case he decided to come after me again. I lucked out when Dylan got into an altercation in the Montana prison and ended up getting stabbed to death. After Dylan's arrest for his assault on Denise, Mike and me, I thought about renewing my relationship with Denise, but it never happened. She quickly reverted back to her old ways while living with her parents. They laid it on thick, convincing Denise she sinned by sleeping with me while she was married, that she was under the spell of me and an ungodly lesbian. Her mother screened my one phone call to the house. When I approached Denise outside her house the next day, Denise refused to talk to me. Dylan's parents also blamed Denise for his outburst, insisting it was her fault for being unfaithful, completely ignoring Dylan's 11 months with a younger woman in Montana. Both sets of parents pressured Denise to stop the annulment, claiming that her son Mike would be seen as illegitimate if the marriage was undone. I spoke to a legal expert about it, who told me that was nonsense, but Denise chose to go along with her parents' wishes. Many years later, I saw Denise at a tennis match between Christy and Mike's respective college teams. Denise smiled at me, but the smile lacked its previous glow. Christy spent some time after the match with Mike. They talked and reminisced how close they were to becoming step-siblings. Mike told Christy that Denise never divorced his father, even during his 7 years in 2 prisons. Neither of them visited him during those years. Denise became a widow when Dylan died, then married the man sitting next to her in the stands, an ex-priest of all things. Do we make our own luck? 5 or 6 weeks after being ambushed by Dylan outside the bar, I was mostly recovered. Christy and I were walking through Riverfront Park in downtown Spokane when I spotted a beautiful woman jogging toward us on the trail. She gave us a look of recognition as she passed, smiled, but didn't slow down. It took me a half a minute to figure it out. Wendy, the nurse who removed my IV. That thought was immediately followed by a second thought. Damn. Too bad she didn't stop to say hello. Christy and I continued on the path to the children's playground while I wondered if my love life would ever recover. I was pushing Christy on the swing, my mind 500,000 miles away, when a voice behind me simply said, "Hi." I turned around to find Wendy standing there. My mind went blank until I got whacked by Christy's seat on its backswing. Christy screamed out, "Daddy," and almost fell out of the seat. I recovered fast enough to catch Christy. Wendy asked, "Is she all right?" I nodded yes, before Wendy started laughing. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I suppose the last thing you need is another concussion. How are you doing?" Wendy held my chin in one hand and turned my head back and forth to examine my nose. "It looks like it's healing." I took that opportunity to look into her eyes. It's hard to explain and makes little sense, but it's as if the higher powers flipped the switch that day from kinda unlucky to very lucky. For the next 3 decades, things just seemed to go my way, at least until that day in the doctor's office as we reviewed my brain's CT scan. That's how we became a couple, me holding Christy in my arms and Wendy holding my chin, giving me her medical opinion on how my nose was healing. I asked, "Would you have dinner with me? Any evening you're available?" Wendy's eyes tracked from my nose to my eyes. "What about that woman that was hovering over you at the hospital? Won't she be upset or jealous?" "Tess is just a good friend and my doubles tennis partner. We aren't in a relationship." I thought maybe she might want to change that status the way she acted. I smiled. That would really upset her girlfriend. Tess is a lesbian. The girl with the big ears in my arms interrupted. "Daddy, what's a lesbian?" Wendy gave me an amused look as if to say, "How are you going to answer that one, Daddy?" Remember, this was the early 80s. Things weren't quite as open as they are today. I chickened out. "Baby, can I talk to Wendy for a minute? I'll answer your question later." I turned to Wendy. "Now that we have established I'm not in a relationship, can you answer my original question before we get sidetracked again? Can I buy you dinner sometime this week?" We had dinner, followed by more dates. We clicked on many levels. Wendy didn't play tennis, but she was an avid golfer, so more of my free time was spent on the links and less on the courts. Tess whined a little, although she did it in a way that made it clear she was happy for me. I didn't officially introduce Wendy as my girlfriend to Christy for a couple months. The poor kid was still reeling from the loss of Denise and Mike. The timing helped. Within a week of that first date, Christy was scheduled to spend 2 months with her mother and grandparents during summer break. I had reasons of my own to take time building a relationship with Wendy. More than one nosy friend questioned whether our relationship was a rebound. I heard it enough times, and it turned out Wendy's friends and coworkers brought it up to her. We just took everything nice and slow. I realized something soon after we started dating. It occurred to me how similar Denise and Jane were in appearances. Both were blondes with blue eyes. Both had that wide-open, friendly smile that immediately attracted me to them. Both were about 5'9", with large chest. How had I missed that before? The similarities were made more apparent after comparing those two to Wendy. Wendy is a 5'5" brunette with brown eyes. She has a slim waist which gives the illusion of more backside than she really has. She complained about her big butt until I told her, "Enough." Wendy's small bust is a perfect fit on her slim body. I was pleased with the differences, and here's why. I have a friend, David, who after he and his first wife Betty divorced, he dates and eventually marries a woman named Becky, who looked very much like Betty. People were too polite to say anything, but I'd watched them at social functions when David introduced Becky to someone who knew his first wife. You could see the confusion on people's faces, like, "Is this a joke?" before they realized it wasn't. Poor Becky. People constantly called her Betty. David and Becky eventually divorced. Turns out Betty and Becky also had similar personalities. The same issues that destroyed the first marriage destroyed the second. I don't know if some part of my brain tried to recreate my first marriage when I decided. Denise was the one. They certainly had different values when it came to intimacy. But was I only fooling myself regarding the physical attraction? I guess I'll never know. I talked to Christy almost every other day during the 2 months she spent with her mother and grandparents. Jane was dating a high school volleyball coach, and Christy was getting great lessons from him. I silently hoped this wouldn't turn her off to tennis. I needn't have worried. Christy eventually ended up getting high school varsity letters in tennis and volleyball, and chose a college which offered a nice tennis scholarship. Another reason for our slow courtship was due to Wendy's work schedule. She lacked seniority at the hospital and worked nights. Nights can do a number on a relationship. Besides the physical differences, there was another big difference between Wendy and the 2 previous loves of my life. Both Jane and Denise were happy to go along with my decisions when it came to how we spent our time together. I love going to a movie or a rock and roll concert, maybe a good steak restaurant for dinner, and that's usually how my dates went with Jane and Denise. It was different with Wendy. She'd go to a movie or rock concert with me, but on our next date she would pick the activity. I couldn't complain because she would pay when it was her turn to pick. And I found myself enjoying live theater, country western dancing, and Lord help me, sushi. The biggest surprise was how much I learned to love hiking in the mountains. Being a Midwest city boy, the nearest I came to nature was swatting mosquitoes on some Wisconsin lake when we'd cruise up to Lake Geneva for the 4th of July. Wendy took me to REI and got me a pair of hiking boots and 3 pair of wool socks. The very next weekend, I'm hiking into some Idaho hot springs. We'd only been dating 2 months and we still hadn't consummated the relationship, so I was stunned when we entered the clearing where the hot springs were. There were probably 8 or 9 other people there, mostly in their 20s or 30s, and half were women, and not one of them had a stitch of clothes on. Wendy dropped her backpack and just stripped right out of her clothes. It was the first time I saw her naked. She jumped into one of the pools and called to me, "Come on, JR, this feels great." I dropped my pack and shed my clothes, all except my undershorts, and sat down in the pool next to Wendy. The girl sitting across from me chose that moment to stand up and sit cross-logged on the edge. "Really?" I looked at Wendy. She had a stupid grin on her face. I whispered, "You could have warned me." "What, and missed the look on your face? Very funny." "Now that you're in the water, get out of those wet pants and let them dry out." I slipped my pants off and, half standing, tried to toss the shorts next to my gear without exposing my excitement. I was only partially successful. "Nice, I kind of had a feeling it was good size during our slow dances. You've got nothing to be ashamed of." I wasn't worried about the size. No lady has ever complained. I'm just the only guy here sporting a Woody. How do those guys do it? I've been coming here for years, since my college boyfriend took me here. Newcomers usually take a while to get past it. You'll see. In a half hour, you'll be used to it. I don't know about that. For one thing, this is the first time I've seen you naked, and you've got an incredible body. Now you're just teasing me, and you've gone way too far. I'm never going to be able to get out of this pool if you keep that up. I eventually was able to get out without embarrassing myself. Wendy and I hiked another half-mile and found a nice spot to set up the tent near the edge of a short cliff with an excellent view of the valley below. This being my first night sleeping in the woods, I followed Wendy's instructions. We ate freeze-dried food, surprisingly good, probably because I was so hungry by then. Wendy pulled our sleeping bags out of the tent and laid them on the ground as it started to get dark. "Aren't we going to sleep inside the tent?" "Yes, but that's later," Wendy answered as she stripped off her clothes. "Come here." As I said, I was the camping outdoor novice, so I followed her instructions. Wendy sat me down, then sat on my lap facing me. "I've wanted to make love to you for weeks now, but I know you needed time, and I wanted our first time to be special, something you've never experienced before. Something we'll carry in our hearts forever. I love you, JR. Make love to me." We kissed, our tongues darting in and out. Wendy broke the kiss. "Damn, I needed you and this so badly." I was amazed. How did she know? Of all the wonderful positions to make love to a woman, this was my absolute favorite. Being able to look in her eyes, kiss her, hold her everywhere. All these things made that first coupling with Wendy a most special experience. I felt Wendy shiver, my hands gripping her and drawing her closer to me. After she settled down, we started back up again. Wendy's tongue found mine and danced until the release. We settled down, our breathing returning to normal. I didn't ask, is it okay that I went on the pill after our second date. I knew this would happen. Wendy slid off my lap and laid back on the sleeping bag. It was a moonless night. The sky darkened as it got late, and more stars appeared. I never saw so many stars in my life. Wendy pointed out the Milky Way, the first time I'd seen it. Wendy nestled her head on my shoulder while pointing out the satellites as they passed over, and we saw 2 shooting stars. After an hour, I heard her softly breathing. She had fallen asleep with my arm around her. I held out as long as I could, but after a while I needed to move my arm or risk losing it. I woke Wendy with a kiss. We grabbed the bags and went inside the tent to sleep. The next morning we rose with the sun. Wendy made coffee, some freeze-dried eggs. Not as good as the freeze-dried stew. Another first for me right after breakfast, bathing in a stream. Wendy was kind. She didn't laugh as I climbed out of the ice-cold stream. We broke camp and hiked back to the trailhead. On the way we discussed our relationship and made a commitment to each other to be exclusive, no dating, affairs, etc. with others. I think we both felt good about the agreement, which is why it was such a surprise 3 months, 3 wonderful months, later when I received a packet in the mail. There was a typed note and computer disk inside. The note read, "See what your girlfriend has been up to." I placed the disk into my computer's slot and watched in horror. There was the woman I was weeks away from asking to marry me, with another man. I couldn't determine who the man was because of the way the video was edited. But there was no doubt it was Wendy. The filming was done from a stationary camera and there were at least 5 different scenes. I didn't watch all 5, nor did I watch any of the scenes in their entirety. I watched just enough to know Wendy wasn't coerced and that she was getting off on this. I shut the computer down, made myself a stiff drink and sat down trying to work out a plan. During the 3 months since our hike, Wendy had given me every reason to assume she was abiding by our agreement. A woman couldn't show more affection or happiness than how she behaved whenever we were together. That made her treachery on the video difficult to comprehend. Could the woman I loved be that devious? Unfortunately, given my history, the answer could be yes. Wendy was coming over that evening to have dinner with Christy and me. When Wendy arrived, I did all I could to remain calm, including only having a single drink with dinner. Christy excused herself to watch a movie, giving Wendy and me time to talk alone. "Wendy, I have something to show you." We walked into my home office. Wendy sat at my desk while I powered up the PC. I started up the video. "I'll be right back." I left the room, closing the door, not wanting to see those scenes again. I returned 10 minutes later. The PC was shut down and Wendy was sitting slouched over, her hands covering her tear-stained face. I was the first to speak. "I thought we had an agreement." Wendy looked up at me. There was horror in her eyes. "We do, and I haven't broken it. These were taken some time ago before you and I started dating." "Wendy, you know my history with Christy's mom. As much as I want to believe you, I'd feel like the biggest chump if I was cheated on a second time. Is there any way to prove the videos are old? Who's the man anyway?" "It's Dr. James Andrews, and no, I don't know how to prove to you that those movies were taken last year. James and I dated for almost 5 months before I found out he was screwing at least 2 other nurses. I certainly didn't know he was filming us. Those movies were taken in his bedroom. He obviously hid the camera from me." "Why did he send these to me? I don't understand." "James wasn't happy when I broke it off with him. He promised to break it off with the others if I forgave him. I told him to go to hell. Last month he approached me, asked if I'd give him another chance. I refused, told him I found a real man who understood the concept of love and fidelity. He didn't say anything. I figured he understood." Christy chose that moment to knock on the door and walk in the room. I was at a loss. Here we go again. Christy was starting to forget about Denise and was accepting Wendy in our life. How could I be so goddamn stupid? I sat in my chair as Christy climbed in my lap and innocently asked Wendy if she'd tell her a bedtime story or sing a song. Wendy's held off the tears long enough to tell Wendy she needed to get going right away. Christy didn't see Wendy's eyes cloud over before the tears began again. Wendy shouted goodbye before we heard the front door close. I sat wondering what I could do. I didn't have a clue. How could Wendy convince me those videos were from last year? Could I trust her if it couldn't be proven? Finally, how the hell do I unsee the woman I loved with another man? Even if the videos are old, the few minutes of seeing her with him would be difficult to forget. I told Christy to go brush her teeth and I'd be in to tuck her in. Christy might only be 8, but she wasn't unaware. Daddy, why was Wendy so sad when she left? I was prepared for her question. I never lied to my little girl. But that didn't mean she had to have all the details. Wendy heard some bad news about a person she works with at the hospital, and it made her very sad. Maybe we'll find out more soon. I hope she's all right, Daddy. I like her. I like her too. We'll keep our fingers crossed everything is okay. I tucked in my daughter before walking into the kitchen and pouring myself 3 fingers of good bourbon. The next 2 days were maybe the longest 2 whole days of my life. There was nothing I could think of to ease my anxiety. Friday evening, the phone rang. JR, can I come over tonight? I thought you were working tonight. I took the night off. We need to clear this up and I don't want it to wait. Are you free tonight? Yes, of course. Have you had dinner? No, but don't worry about that. I only need to talk with you. My heart was pounding. Come right over. Wendy was at the house in less than 10 minutes. I didn't even give her a chance to ring the bell. As soon as I heard her car in the drive, I opened the front door. As soon as Wendy walked in the door, Christy ran into her arms. Wendy, you're back. Wendy looked up at me, her eyes searching. Was there some deeper meaning in Christy's greeting? Had I told Christy that we were through? I shook my head in answer to Wendy's silent question. Christy was concerned when you left so suddenly last time. I told her you heard some bad news about a co-worker. She missed you the last 2 days. Wendy looked relieved. Christy, can I talk to your dad for a few minutes about some grown-up things? I'll come and sit with you when your dad and I are finished. I promise. Christy wasn't crazy about being excluded, but obeyed. As soon as she left the room, Wendy walked toward the den and closed the door after I followed her in. JR, the only way I could figure out how to convince you I haven't cheated was if you heard it straight from James's own mouth. I cornered him this morning at the hospital. The idiot didn't even consider I was recording the conversation, and he didn't know one of the nurse supervisors was within earshot when I cornered him. I want you to listen to this. Wendy pulled out a recorder and pressed play. James, JR showed me the movies of us, and it had to be you that sent them to him. J. Oh damn, really? He showed you? W. Yay, oh damn, really? Why did you send those to him? J. I was hoping the guy would get pissed and just break it off with you. I figured some idiot banker would go off the deep end and never talk to you again. I was at the nurse's station when you told Glenda that your boyfriend had trust issues because of his first wife cheating on him. So, I sent those videos thinking if you got dumped, you and I could get back together. How was I to know your boyfriend was smart enough to ask you about them instead of just dumping you? You scum. You thought I'd run to you after this? J. It was worth a shot. You weren't supposed to know about the videos or that I sent them to him. 9 out of 10 guys would have just dumped you without getting your side of the story. W. Glenda, did you get all that? G. Yes, I did. J. You set me up, you goddamn. W. You have no idea. Wendy turned the recorder off. She looked at me. Now what, JR? I hugged Wendy as hard as I could without hurting her. We have a lot to talk about. But first, what are you going to do about this doctor? Well, that's a problem. If I turn him into the administration, most likely those movies get viewed by numerous people. I'm not all that crazy about that. Can you understand? I could understand Wendy's reluctance, but she needed to know I was 100% behind her and there were bigger issues here. That's the real problem, isn't it? Any time one of these perverts does something to a woman, the victim becomes a victim all over again when she signs a complaint. The system turns it around on the woman. Her intimate life becomes a matter of public record. The pervert's defense lawyer is given latitude, claiming it's only a zealous defense of the client, and ends up making the victim the criminal. That's if it even goes to trial. Too often the man is rich, powerful, or has some special talent. Society, his peers or superiors, are willing to give him a pass because of his talent, whether he's a CEO, a sports hero, a doctor, a priest, or minister. But here's the issue for you. If you give this Dr. Andrews a pass, I guarantee in a year or two, maybe less, he's back at it with another nurse or patient. Wendy listened to my spiel, and I could tell she needed more time to think about it. I knew as well as she did that turning the doctor into HR could finish her career at the hospital. They're going to try and turn this around on me, Dr. Andrews is very popular at the hospital. Most everyone will think I was lucky to share his bed and won't give a damn if he filmed it. Okay, you don't have to decide tonight. Tonight there's a little girl waiting for us to finish our adult conversation. Let's take her out to Baskin and Robbins for a cone. We have the weekend and have a lot to discuss. The three of us went out for ice cream, much to Christy's delight. I admit it was fantastic to be together again. Wendy stayed overnight, but we didn't share the bed that night. I could tell Wendy was disappointed. But we needed to get everything sorted out before going forward. Wendy didn't waste any time Saturday morning. After breakfast, she and I sat with our coffee on my back deck. JR, you're having a hard time with the images after watching those movies, right? Yeah, I knew you had men before me, but I didn't need to see you with any of them. It made it too real. I can understand that, JR, but I want you to think about something. I slept with a dozen men before I met you, but never made love to any of them. You were the first man who I gave my heart and soul. You, on the other hand, gave your heart and soul to two women before me. One you married and another you were planning to marry. Think about this from my perspective, from a woman's perspective. Do you think it's any easier for me to get over that fact? Wendy made a great point. I didn't know how to answer her question. And think about this, JR. I've seen both of those women. They both had bigger chest, much bigger than mine. Wendy said this with the slightest curl of her lips, showing me she was trying to keep the conversation from becoming too heavy. I'm no fool. I fondled her through her shirt and kissed her. Yours are perfect. Damn right, she kissed me back. I'm serious about us, JR, but I have a few conditions before we go further. Oh, I thought to myself. Number 1. We have children together. I want at least 2, maybe 3. Can you handle having 3 or 4 children running around the house? I'd actually love that, but will you love Christy as a daughter, even after you start having children of your own? I already love Christy, that's not going to change. I'll give her all the love that Jane allows. I won't try and replace Jane in Christy's heart. I understand. What's number 2? The second condition is you have to stop racing. I can't stand when you take off to the track. Can you do that for me? Damn, Wendy was asking a lot. Honda just came out with their NT650 Hawk and I had my eyes on buying one. It was a beautiful cafe racer, all stripped down, almost naked. The thing is, I already was thinking of quitting the tracks. The young guys were blowing me away and I was starting to work too hard to keep up. Last year I crashed twice, neither serious, but still. Do I get to keep the Harley? I knew this would be a tough one for Wendy. In the medical profession, we bikers were nicknamed future donors. If you promise to be careful. I decided this was an opportunity I'd been waiting for. Okay, I give up racing, keep the cruiser, and you promise to ride on the back once in a while. Wendy surprised me once again. You buy me a helmet and all the leathers, I'll go for a ride with you. But remember, you promise to be careful. All right, I nearly shouted. What's next? The last condition is you promise to love me the rest of your life, that we grow old together. I'm not asking you to be faithful because I know you. You don't need to be asked. You'll be faithful as long as we're together. I promise the same. It's a deal. Do we seal this with a handshake or... What are you, nuts? We seal it with a kiss. Wendy jumped onto my lap, wrapped her arms around me and gave me a soul kiss. Wendy, did you just propose to me? Yes, Mr. Douglas, I did, and in case you weren't paying close attention, you accepted. I'll talk to Christy later today. I'm sure she'll be thrilled, but I think it's something she and I need to discuss alone. And you and I need to finish the discussion regarding what to do about Dr. Andrews. All right? The mention of Andrews brought a frown to Wendy's face. I needed to get us back to this morning's happier subject. Say, since you proposed to me, do I get the ring? Wendy slapped my chest. No, silly. I've already picked out the ring you're going to buy me at Ben Bridge. I'll show it to you tomorrow. An hour later, Wendy left to get some clothes at her apartment. I took the opportunity to talk to Christy. As expected, she was thrilled. I even brought up the idea of her having a couple siblings, and she was even more excited by that possibility. Saturday evening, Wendy and I had the dark conversation regarding the doctor. She agreed with me that she couldn't let it slide. Together, we came up with a plan. Sunday, the three of us went ring shopping. Christy had been asking if she could get her ears pierced, and this was a perfect time to make that happen. Wendy pointed out the ring she liked. It was a beautiful half-carat solitaire, just like Wendy to pick something understated. I told Wendy and Christy to pick out Christy's earrings while I talked to the salesman. I told him to replace the half carat with the full 1 carat next to it. He smiled and whispered, "She's going to love it. It will be ready tomorrow afternoon." Christy got her ears pierced and a nice pair of sapphire studs. Wendy loved the ring when I gave it to her Monday night. She stared at it for a few seconds before she realized the diamond was larger than the one she picked out. I was rewarded with hugs and kisses and tears. The following weekend we were married by a justice of the peace. Wendy did turn the doctor into HR. They hemmed and hawed, but finally fired him. The turning point was when another nurse publicized the harassment she received when she rebuffed his advances. She had complained to HR and they ignored it. The complaint got buried. When word of Wendy's complaint became common knowledge, the other nurse made her previous complaint public. Neither the HR director nor Dr. Andrews could weather the subsequent storm. Wendy sued Dr. Andrews for secretly filming, then sharing the movies. The jury's outrage increased when they heard how Andrews sent copies to me in an effort to sabotage our relationship. Just before the jury went out, Andrews' attorney offered Wendy $200,000 if she signed a non-disclosure agreement. Wendy and her attorney discussed it. It was a good offer, but in the end she rolled the dice and let the jury decide. This also assured Andrews' filming was public knowledge. Luckily, the jury came back with a decent award. Wendy was awarded $130,000. The money helped because by the time the trial ended, Wendy was no longer working at the hospital. Wendy's original instincts were correct. For every one person who was pleased by Wendy's willingness to stand up to the harassment, 2 were upset at losing a valuable surgeon and thought a lowly nurse should have just sucked it up and quit if she didn't like it. Wendy's attorney convinced the hospital that it was in everyone's best interest if they went their separate ways, if the hospital agreed to a year's severance. The hospital agreed, wrote the check, and said, "Good riddance." Wendy was 4 months pregnant when the trial ended. 5 months later we greeted William Douglas III into the world. And no, he wasn't nicknamed Trey, since there wasn't a Bill in the house. My son got to have his grandfather's nickname. 18 months after Bill was born, Wendy gave birth to twin girls. Leslie and Emma were named after our respective mothers. Wendy and I agreed the family was complete. The question now, which of us would get fixed? We did it the only fair way. We flipped a coin. Heads, I get the clip. Tails, Wendy gets her tubes tied. 1 flip. Tails. I took the sting out of Wendy's losing the coin toss by showing her the tickets. 2 first-class round-trip tickets to St. Martin, 1 month after the twins were scheduled to be weaned. The babysitters were already on board. Christy's nanny, Mrs. Hanson, was still helping us out with Bill and the twins. Christy was now 13 and a very responsible big sister. Both Wendy's parents and my parents agreed to fly in for a week apiece and help Christy and Mrs. Hanson. I had the 2 weeks covered. We rented a condo on Orient Beach. Most of the beach was topless and the end was totally nude. Although Wendy and I hiked into those infamous nude hot springs a number of times before Bill was born, we'd never been to a nude beach. This would be a first for both of us. Wendy knew about the topless beaches in the Caribbean. The nude beach was my surprise on her. As Wendy looked at the tickets, I couldn't stop myself from teasing. "I bet you can't wait until we hit those topless beaches to set those puppies free and show off them off." Wendy's chest grew from an A cup to a B cup after 3 children. Still 1 or 2 cup sizes smaller than Jane and Denise, but like I said before, they're perfect, especially on her lean body. "JR, you are such a pervert. What am I going to do with you?" "Keep me if you have any sense. Remember when I wrote earlier that my luck changed? It's true because she did keep me. Wendy became my best friend. She told me when I was wrong, encouraged me when I was right, and supported me either way. We had our disagreements, but never went to bed without at least talking through them. The biggest disagreement was whether Wendy would start working again after the twins began preschool. Mrs. Hanson was still with us and Wendy missed her career. We finally compromised when Wendy found a part-time position, 4 days a week, and she'd be home by 3. We loved to travel, and some of our best times were trips with the kids to the national parks. We camped all over the western states, Zion, Arches, Yellowstone, Crater Lake. You name it, we were there. Of course, we had to fit these trips in between all the various sports schedules. A hell of a nightmare, but a labor of love. My 4 children grew up healthy with only the usual bumps and bruises from sports, and turned out well adjusted. Thankfully, we managed to avoid any major crises along the way. We have friends that we consider to be great, loving parents whose children grew up to become addicts, homeless vagrants, and/or financial burdens. One couple lost their youngest son to an overdose. At least 3 of the couples we know have their 20 and 30-something children still living with them. Wendy and I had a few concerns along the way. Our son, Bill, experimented with some substances in high school, but we caught it early and had open discussions with him. At first, we got the usual arguments like, "You guys drink, so what's the difference?" Our calm response was, "When's the last time you saw either of us drinking before work, and did it ever affect our ability to do our jobs?" Many of Bill's friends were starting their school days under the influence, and Bill could see how their grades were suffering. We also pointed out, we're adults, and we're not breaking the law. I believe our measured approach, avoiding overreaction and finding a compromise with Bill, helped. His grades improved, and he made it through high school and college without any further issues. Another tense moment came just 2 years later when Leslie, one of our 17-year-old twins, came home from summer basketball camp and told us she'd fallen in love with one of her coaches, a 23-year-old college senior. We learned he did nothing to encourage her infatuation, but the next few months were riddled with angst for all of us. Luckily, the issue resolved itself eventually, with no one breaking any laws, no long-term animosities, and in a most satisfying manner. 5 years after Leslie's announcement that afternoon, I walked Leslie down the aisle as she became Mrs. Marcus Price. Theirs is a romantic tale and too lengthy to go into here. Their 2 girls are the 2 young grandchildren sitting in the waiting room at the very beginning of this tale. Bad news, which brings us back to just before the day this tale started. Wendy and I had recently finished a bucket list trip to Italy. We rented a Ducati in Florence and did 14 days touring Tuscany and the Adriatic coast. We watched Valentino Rossi outduel Jorge Lorenzo at the MotoGP race in San Marino. Wendy had only seen my races and was awestruck watching these professionals reach speeds in excess of 170 miles per hour. It was a great trip, great food and drinks, wonderful people, and a beautiful traveling companion. Soon after returning from that awesome trip, I started having headaches and brushed them off as sinus trouble. Wendy finally convinced me to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist who told me it wasn't my sinuses. More tests, more doctors, until a CT scan found the tumor in my brain. Unfortunately, because I had a high tolerance for pain, the tumor had been growing for quite a time. Surgery would be iffy, full recovery even more so. You already know I woke up after the surgery. Now it's time for therapy and keeping our fingers crossed. With luck, I get to spend 5 more years with Wendy and my family. Epilogue, 10 years later. 10 years, yes, you read that right. I'm sitting in the stands watching Matthew graduate from Gonzaga Prep High School. Never thought I'd make it this far. I turned 70 last week, and we decided to celebrate both events by combining it with a family reunion. Christy came in from Colorado Springs, where she works for USA Volleyball. Christy brought Casey, her friend. We're all hoping our oldest has found the one, but keep our mouths shut. It's our own outlook on life that wants that for her. She's been happy living the single, carefree life. She claims the athletes she coaches are her kids, and no diapers. Bill and his wife still live in the Spokane area. Emma, her husband, and their 2 sons are close by in Sandpoint. Thank goodness, because Leslie, Marcus, their 2 girls and 5-year-old son moved to Miami when Marcus received an offer to become an assistant coach for the Heat. At least it gives Wendy and I an excuse to spend a few weeks in the warm Florida sunshine every winter. So the entire family was together for the first time since Christmas, 18 months ago. We had to rent a large house on Airbnb for the week because Wendy and I downsized after the last child left the nest. We have a small 2-bedroom cabin north of town in the mountains. 4 children, 3 children-in-laws, 6 grandchildren, and 1 friend. What a treat to have my entire family around me. But what a treat when they left after a week. I was exhausted. Afterward, by Wendy Douglas. I found JR's journal in an old moleskin notebook he had in his nightstand. I don't know if he wanted his memoir published, but I decided he would. Less than 2 months after Matthew's high school graduation, the tumor came back with a vengeance. His doctor told him surgery was out of the question, and the therapy wouldn't do much good. It was a matter of managing the pain. JR spent a month visiting the kids and grandkids, then came home for the end. That last night JR woke up, I was sitting in a chair reading a book and I heard him stir. He opened his eyes and smiled at me. My God, Wendy, what a beautiful ride it's been. He closed his eyes and fell back asleep. I kissed his forehead. That was the last hour of JR's life. JR never got over the tragic death of that man, the CEO, in Chicago, who died so suddenly walking down the street. JR said he felt lucky. He was given the chance to put his house in order and say goodbye to his loved ones. The prick, and I say that in a good, loving way, had the nerve to tell me to find another man after he was gone. He said I was too young to spend my life alone. I was too beautiful, hot, generous, and gracious, his words. And it was my duty to make another man as happy as I made him. Can you believe that? He got angry when I told him to forget it. Well, JR is physically gone, but all I need to do is look at our children and grandchildren to understand he's still with all of us and how lucky I was to stop at that swing set 38 years ago.